Hello and welcome. My name is Kevin Ashton. I'm a chef and food writer, and if you go to any search engine in the world and type in Chef Kevin Ashton, you can find me. Now today I'd like to show you a vegetarian dish I call Vegetable Strudel. And I created this dish when I was working in Washington D.C. some years ago. And it's a symphony of vegetables. Each vegetable is prepared in a different way, and then it's all layered together and rolled up like a Swiss roll. So let's get started. So in front of the camera we have all our ingredients we're going to use for our vegetable strudel for the filling. We have 300 grams of white cabbage, which we're going to thinly slice. We've got 50 grams of onion, which are already thinly sliced. We've got some turmeric. We're going to use 1 heaped teaspoon of turmeric. We're going to use 75 grams of unsalted butter. We've got 300 grams of baby spinach that I've washed. Now when you're washing spinach, you want to fill up your pot or your sink with cold, clean water, and then gently put your spinach into the water rather than run the water on it. That way your spinach will not get bruised. We're going to use 2 large flat mushrooms, and we're going to use 125 grams of wild mushrooms. You can see the wild mushrooms on the back of the cutting board there. I've kept the stalks to the wild mushrooms. Don't throw those away. These are the stalks from the shiitake mushrooms. You can put them into vegetable stock and you can get lots of flavour out of them. We've got 200 grams of carrots, and if you have a food processor at home with the julienne attachment, you can use that to get your julienne of carrots, matchstick, that's what we call it in the restaurant business. Don't worry though, if you don't have a food processor, I'm going to show you how to cut the carrots into julienne. We have some fresh dill. We're going to use 10 grams of fresh dill with the carrots, and we've got sun-dried tomatoes at the front of the cutting board, 3 fat cloves of garlic. We're going to use a little pinch of white sugar, 3 tablespoons of olive oil, and we're going to put a little sprinkle of sesame seeds. Also we have white wine that we're going to put with the sun-dried tomatoes. I'm using a wok rather than a frying pan so I don't spill anything on the top of the stove. I'm going to put my 50 grams of sliced onions into a pan that's like on a medium heat. You can just hear that starting to sizzle. And we'll get that cooking a little bit, and then we'll add our cabbage. Okay, now we're going to add our 300 grams of sliced cabbage. You can see I've just roughly chopped it up. And I've also made sure that I've got no stalks in my 300 grams of cabbage, because we want it to break down. And because this is a wok, we can just tip it over like that to make sure that the olive oil that we've got in the pan is distributed amongst the onions and the cabbage. And we want to cook this without getting it brown at all. So we're going to be a little bit patient, and we want to get it about halfway cooked, and then we're going to add 25 grams of unsalted butter to it to enrich the flavour, give it some more flavour. We're also going to season all of our ingredients, so we need to use a little bit of salt and pepper, sea salt, and a little bit of black pepper. Now cooking this mixture will take about 6 to 8 minutes. Now we're going to add 25 grams of unsalted butter. Just make sure that butter is getting melted and distributed around the cabbage. So at this point we probably need to cook it for another 2 minutes before we add our turmeric and our sesame seeds. The cabbage now has had another 2 minutes and it's getting soft and tender. So we're going to add 1 heaped teaspoon of turmeric. It's going to give it a lovely spicy flavour, a lovely yellow colour. So make sure that that gets completely mixed in. Now we're going to add a scant tablespoon of sesame seeds to give it a little bit of contrast. Just shake that tablespoon so we make sure we don't lose any of those sesame seeds. So the cabbage has had about another 90 seconds and you can see it's quite soft, but it's not totally soft. There's still a little crunch in it if you bite it, because remember it's also going to cook inside the pastry. Give it one final stir and that's good. We'll take that off the heat now. The next vegetable we're going to prepare is the spinach, and it's really simple. You get a large stainless steel saucepan onto your stove, get it hot, and then we're going to put the spinach, the drained spinach, into the pot. We're going to add 25 grams of unsalted butter, but we don't want to add the butter until after the spinach has started cooking. We're going to put some salt and pepper in it, and we're also going to grate some fresh nutmegs. So let's put that spinach in. Now it takes very little time to cook this spinach, but we need to keep it moving. We've got a spoon and we're just going to gently turn it over, and you're just in essence steaming the spinach because you don't want it overcooked. So I'll turn it over a little bit more. You can see there it's starting to get cooked very quick. So now we're going to add 25 grams of unsalted butter, and we're going to put our nutmeg in. So we want enough nutmeg to be able to taste the nutmeg. I'll turn this so you can see me better. Okay, we're going to taste it a moment too to make sure we have enough nutmeg flavour. And you see how much the spinach cooks down. You start off with a big pot, and at this point we're going to add some salt and pepper. And just keep stirring it. And we're also going to turn the heat off, because really there's enough residual heat in there. Just about another minute or so and that spinach is cooked. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to drain the spinach in a colander so all the water comes out of it, because we want it quite dry when we make our vegetable strudel. Vegetable we're going to prepare for our strudel are the mushrooms. We've got a mixture of wild mushrooms and flat mushrooms. Here I've got this is an oyster mushroom. This is a stem from porcini, also called a cep, and these are shiitake mushrooms. And we want the pieces roughly the same. And the shiitakes, since we've taken the stalks out, we just want pieces about that size. And then when it comes to the we can take the stalk first and just slice that up, just so that then it sits flat on the board. And I'm just going to turn these around and just cut them in half. So that's how we're going to do the mushrooms. And we'll cut all the rest of the mushrooms up and we'll show you how we're going to cook them. So now we're going to prepare the mushrooms we've cut up. So I've got my wok on a medium high heat, and we're going to measure 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and we're also going to add 3 cloves of garlic. And what I've done with the garlic is I've just cracked the garlic open because I want to get some garlic flavour into the oil, but I don't want the garlic too small because I want to be able to fish it out when the mushrooms are cooked. So we'll start off with the flat mushrooms. Make sure we don't waste any, and then almost immediately add the wall mushrooms, the 125 grams wall mushrooms. And we'll also add some salt and pepper. And stir it around a little more. And now we're going to add the butter. Cooking the mushrooms on a high heat. Keep the mushrooms moving so that we want to mix that garlic flavour into the mushrooms. Now the reason I didn't cut the garlic up is I didn't want the garlic to burn, and sometimes when you have garlic cut very finely, it can very easily burn and taste bitter. So this is why I'm showing you how I used the garlic in this particular instance. Now all the liquid that's coming out of the mushrooms, we want that to be absorbed and evaporated by the time the mushrooms are all cooked. So you can see that the liquid coming out of the mushrooms has now evaporated, and the mushrooms are starting to brown a little bit. We want a little bit of colour on them, but not too much. So we just keep moving it around, making sure. And also the garlic is getting nicely brown, so that will add some nice caramel notes to those mushrooms. Now when we take the mushrooms out of the wok, we're going to put them in a container, but we're going to line the container with a piece of paper towel because we want to drain off any excess fat of butter and oil from the mushrooms, so we don't have too much liquid going into our vegetable strudel. The next thing I'm going to show you is the sun-dried tomatoes. We've got 100 grams here, and we're going to cut them up a little bit first, just roughly cut them up, and we're going to put them into 50 milliliters of wine, or you could put it into a food processor, and then we're just going to whiz it up, and we want to end up with a chunky paste. And we've got a little bit of oil in the bottom, so we'll take a little bit of that oil and add that, but not too much, because we don't want too much liquid in a vegetable strudel. So I'm just going to put a tiny drop, but not all of it, and then we're going to whiz it, and I'll show you how it looks after I've whizzed it. So we've pureed the sun-dried tomato and wine mixture, and this is what we're looking for. It's not too wet, it's still a little bit chunky, and we can put that into our vegetable strudel just like that. And as promised, now I'm going to show you how to julienne carrots if you don't have an attachment for your food processor. Also in this other bowl I have 10 grams of fresh dill, which I'm going to add to the carrots once they're cooked. So what you want to be looking for in your carrots is fairly evenly sized carrots, not too thin, because then it makes it a little bit easier. And I'm just going to, and then I want to get a flat surface, and then I'm just cutting thin strips all the way down to begin with. Okay, now I've got it all into thin strips. I'm going to cut them in half, and we'll just show you a few. Just cut those into matchsticks. Now whenever you're using a knife on your cutting board, you want to keep the cutting board uncluttered. So we're going to take those cut up carrots and put them out the way. Almost there. Just cut these that way, and then so we have our 200 grams of carrot julienne, and we're going to blanch that in boiling salted water. So we've come over to the stove to blanch our carrots. We've got water that's really boiling. We're going to season the water with a little bit of table salt. You need enough salt in there so you can taste the salt. We're also going to add a little pinch of white granulated sugar. We're going to put the carrots in there in a moment, and we're only going to leave them in there for about a minute, and then we're going to transfer them back out from the saucepan into this bowl of iced water, and then we're going to put some more running water on it just to make sure they're cold, because they're cut up so thin they won't take very long to cook at all. Right, put those carrots in there, and we want to stir them around, and we want the water to come back to the boil before we count that minute. And it's not a bad idea to check it. Needs a little more salt. Right, it's now boiling, so just literally 30 more seconds and we'll start putting it into the ice water. Okay, here we go. Right, almost there, just a couple more spoonfuls. I think I'll use my little strainer here to gather the last few carrots up. So we're just going to cool these carrots down in the iced water and then drain them. So we're now going to start to put the vegetable strudel together. So I have a baking tray that I've lined with some parchment paper and oiled the bottom of the parchment paper so it sticks to the baking tray. My baking tray is about 35 centimeters in length, and you always need to keep in mind how long your baking tray is to make sure that your strudel, when you've got it completely rolled, and that you can fit it onto your tray. Also on the counter I have a clean tea towel and a piece of parchment paper, and this length of parchment paper is 50 centimeters in length, and I need to use that as a guideline of where to put my filo pastry. The filo pastry I'm using today, I bought this from Tesco's. It's not a bad brand, and you usually get 12 sheets, and we're going to use all 12 leaves of the filo pastry. And I've also preheated my oven to 190 degrees Celsius. So whenever you're working with filo pastry, you want to work in a cooler part of the kitchen away from the heat, and you want to try to work reasonably quickly. Another thing you can do to aid yourself is to have a damp, clean tea towel, keeping the rest of your filo pastry a little bit moist to one side. What I have down so far is I've laid 4 sheets of filo, and I've overlapped them, then I've overlapped this other 2 sheets in a slightly different direction. So I've ended up with a rectangle of about 43 centimeters one way by about 32 the other way. Then we're going to brush it with olive oil, and the olive oil will help the pastry to crisp up when it's cooking. And we're just going to brush a little bit of olive oil on between the sheet. So we're going to lay now another 4 sheets. Sheet number 1, we'll lay that way. Make sure it's flat. Then sheet number 2. And I'm just going to handle it very, very gently. Lay that way. And after 2 sheets, we'll give it another little go with the olive oil, not too much, but it will help the sheets crisp up when they're in the oven. And then we'll take another 2 sheets and lay it the other way. So we'll lay 1. This will give it strength by laying the filo pastry in different directions. Again, a little bit of olive oil, and we'll lay these last 4 sheets. So lay 1 that way. And don't worry if you don't get all the sheets. Sometimes there's not 12 sheets in a packet, but anything from 10 will be fine. But I just want to use all 12 rather than waste any, because once you've opened the packet, they do dry out quite quickly. A little bit more olive oil. And I've used about 2 tablespoons probably in total of the olive oil. And we've got last 2 sheets here. Lay that one that way. Lay that one this way. So now we're ready to start with our topping. Now we want to have the filling pretty much towards the center. And the first thing we're going to lay is we're going to put the cabbage. So start in the middle, and remember you want to leave a good space at either end, because otherwise it won't fit onto your tray. When you twist it up, then we need to smooth it out a little bit. But if you start roughly in the middle, then you'll have the space to roll it out and roll it up. So that's all the cabbage. Try to keep fairly straight lines on it. Don't get it too close to the edge. The next thing we're going to put on is our spinach. And remember, when we cooked our spinach and drained it, then I've also pressed it again to get all the extra water out I can, because you don't want any additional water in your finished strudel. And we're just going to lay that on the top, and you want to try to lay the spinach so there is no gaps in the spinach. So when you see a gap, just plug it with a little bit of spinach and kind of try to spread that spinach back out as you're laying the spinach on top of the cabbage. You don't want the spinach to overlap the cabbage, but you do want to get it up to the edges, almost the edges of the cabbage. Okay, that's looking okay. We're next going to lay our carrots. Remember that we cooked our carrots in boiling salty water with a little sugar, and then we chopped up 10 grams of dill and mixed the dill in once the carrots were strained. That way you get the maximum flavour out of the dill. So spread those carrots out, don't sort of go past where the spinach is. Try to make sure that they're even, pack them down a little bit. Okay, I think that's enough carrots there. So the next thing we're going to lay is our wild mushroom and flat mushroom mixture. that we cooked together with the garlic. Then we took the garlic out after the cooking process. So we're just going to lay our mushrooms on top of the carrots. Really simple. Now I don't want the mushrooms sort of quite as flat as the carrots. I want it a little bit more heaped. There you are, really simple. And finally we're going to go with our sun-dried tomato mix. And we're just going to kind of make a sausage with the sun-dried tomato mix along the length of the pastry. Try to keep it even. If you see that part of the sausage is a little bit thinner in some places, then take a moment or two just to level that up and then flatten it down. And now we're ready to start rolling it together. So we're going to brush the pastry, and I've got a little tiny bit of olive oil and a tiny bit of water, and we're just going to brush the pastry all around to help seal the pastry when we roll it up. And the reason we put it on the tea towel is that will help us to shape it. So we need to roll it, and then at this point I'm squashing it in. I hope you can see that on camera. Squashing it in and packing it. I'm trying to keep it in mind that I don't want it any longer than about between my hands, so it'll fit onto my baking tray. So I'm squashing it in, and at the same time I then need to extricate the tea towel from that, because I don't want the tea towel get so entangled that I can't remove it. And now just using the parchment paper, again I need to ease the parchment paper out so I'm not trapping the parchment paper inside, and I'm winding that up as tight as I can. And now we're unwinding it just a little bit, just so I can unroll it. Now we're going to make sure that it's turned on its base, and now we're going to tighten up the ends. Very gently transferred it from the table to the baking tray, and then I've brushed it with a mixture of olive oil and a little water just to make sure that all the pastry stays sealed. Now we're going to put this into the oven at 190 degrees Celsius. So I've just taken the strudel out of the oven. It's had just over 35 minutes, about 36 minutes, at 190 degrees Celsius in a fan assisted oven. And we're going to let it sit and cool for about an hour before we transfer it to the cutting board to slice it. The great thing about the strudel is it reheats really exceptionally well the following day as well. I also wanted to give you some additional tips on how to cut the strudel up and what to use for it. I used a bread knife, a serrated bread knife. This is an old bread knife, but I keep it nice and sharp, and that will give you a much cleaner cut rather than trying to use any kind of straight-edged carving knife. The other thing I wanted to tell you about is if you don't use all the vegetable strudel on your celebration day, then you could cut it up cold and just put the pieces together, as you can see I've done on this tray, and heat it up in an oven at about 160 degrees. And I just brushed the top of the pastry with a tiny bit of butter until the vegetables are hot, and then you can serve it, and it will be as good as it was the first day. So we're going to show you how we're going to serve this. We've got some of that tomato and red pepper sauce, so we're going to put that on the plate. I don't want it all the way to the edge because that'll be a bit too much sauce. I've got a little splash there, So we're just going to take that off with a bit of paper towel, and then we're going to gently take a palette knife and take one of these slices of vegetable strudel. Just make sure the edges are nice and clean and turn it down like that. Turn it, you can see all the different colours, all the different layers of vegetables you put. Now in this little ramekin I have some black olives that I had soaking in a really good quality olive oil, and just to give a little bit more contrast of colour, we're going to scatter some of these black olives around onto the sauce, just as a little finishing touch. Okay, and there you have it, vegetable strudel. Enjoy.